Hello and welcome back to Simple Money Podcast, Canada's own personal finance podcast, presented in short and informative episodes. I'm your host, Matthew Seawick, also known as the Friendly Financial Coach. Today we continue our discussion on biases that affect our personal finances and investment choices. As a quick recap, a bias is a tendency, prejudice, or inclination that is for or against something. These internalized processes can then affect our financial decisions. If you want, you can check out the last episode for a more detailed summary about biases and heuristics. Today we're going to cover 6 more common biases that we should really keep an eye out for. Admittedly, all of us have these biases to varying degrees, but we should be on alert if they have strong control over our actions. First up is a really common bias, and one that we all have in some form or another, and it's called the loss aversion bias. Research has shown that we are more affected by a loss than a gain, even when a loss and a gain are the exact same amount. In some studies, researchers have found that the emotional impact of a loss can be up to twice as much as a similar gain. In many cases, loss aversion bias can arise from a negative experience like past losses, or even seeing others in your social circle having a negative experience. When we overvalue risk, this can obviously affect our financial decisions and push us into investments that have reduced risk and, in conjunction, typically lower returns. This then requires us to put more money aside to hit our financial goals, and in some cases like retirement, this can be a considerable amount extra. And this bias perfectly transitions into the disposition bias. This is when we have a tendency to hold onto an asset that has declined in value and instead sell an asset that has accumulated in value. This translates into holding an underperforming investment and prematurely selling investments that are performing well. Overall, this can lead to reduced investment performance in tax considerations from selling investments that have been sold at a gain. The next bias is called sunk cost bias, and this bias arises when we have too much faith in a specific investment. Individuals that have this bias have a tendency to spend their time, money, energy, and other resources to support an investment that has been shown through evidence that has an expected benefit that is less than the expenses. Using a common example, a person may spend their time and money investing into a company that they think will perform well, even if evidence proves otherwise. In this case, they will suffer from losses and use up their valuable energy to continue this plan. The best bet here is to cut your losses early and redistribute the resources to a more profitable investment. The belief that supports sunk cost bias can come from many different places, including another bias called anchoring and adjustment. This bias arises when we rely mainly on one piece of information when we make a financial decision, which is often the first source of information that we encounter. And afterwards, we have a tendency to show difficulty readjusting to new information. This bias can have either a for or against influence. A big gain in the past on a specific investment may lead someone to have too much faith in investment, or a bad experience may conversely push them away. A common situation that I see is when an individual or family member will have made an investment loss early in their financial life and afterwards they become risk adverse. Making financial choices that can be comfortable to you can also develop into a bias. The familiarity bias occurs when we believe too strongly in a specific investment or choice because we are familiar with it over other options. This type of bias can lead us to have an under-diversified portfolio and possibly to miss out on certain types of opportunities. Finally, we come to our last bias called the availability or recency bias. This bias follows from overestimating the probability of an event occurring if it can be easily recalled. The recency and emotional impact of this recalled event further affects one's behavior, with more recent and emotional events having a larger impact. This bias can turn someone into a more pessimistic investor or can even make someone too overconfident, leading to other financial problems. So that's it for today. Hope that you enjoyed the episode. As always, feel free to drop a review. It definitely helps out the show. And if you have any questions, you can contact me at info@ffcoach.ca, or you can find me on Twitter at @f_fcoach. Take care and talk to you soon.